Thank you. I don't think I've ever worn 3 mics before, but that's fine. It's obviously a high-tech place, Pakenham. The centre of technology. Firstly, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, John, who's a wonderful supporter of what we do. And as soon as he said, would I come to Pakenham, I said, where's Pakenham? No, I knew. I said, no, I'd be delighted. No, I get on the Pakenham train all the time. Fortunately, I get off before Pakenham, but that's okay. Nothing like insulting your host to start with, hey? That's a good way to start. Okay. Look, honestly, if you'd said to me 12, 13 years ago that I'd be, standing up here talking about diet and nutrition and diabetes, I'd have laughed at you. I had zero interest in that sort of thing, except how it affected my athletes. So as Ian has mentioned, my background is in sports medicine. When I was at school, I actually wanted to be a sports commentator, but my mother decided that wasn't an appropriate job for her little Petey, and so she sent me off to medical school. But I tried to sort of work out a way, how can I get paid to watch sport? And so the sports commentary didn't work, so plan B was become a sports medicine doctor. So became a sports physician, sort of helped set up sports medicine as a specialty, started a clinic in Melbourne, Olympic Park Sports Medicine Centre, wrote a textbook, and worked with a bunch of sporting teams. So had a great time, and worked with a couple of AFL clubs, Melbourne and Collingwood, for my sins. In fact, I came home one night and announced to the family that I was going to work for Collingwood. And the kids all said, Dad, you hate Collingwood. And my wife said, children, everyone has his price. So, life lesson number whatever for the kids. But anyway. Worked at that, and then worked for various Olympic teams. I did a couple of Olympics in Atlanta and Sydney. That was great. Then I did the Socceroos for 4 years. Did a World Cup in South Africa. Went from there to the Liverpool Football Club in the UK. Had a stint there, and then my second last gig was cricket team doctor, the Australian cricket team. Did 51 tests in a row, and then most recently back with Melbourne. Did the full cycle. Started at Melbourne, finished at Melbourne. Won a premiership and thought, no, that's enough. I'll retire then. So single-handedly, of course, Anyway, so it was back in 2012. I was living and working in Liverpool, the football club there. Wonderful city, Liverpool. Anyone from Liverpool, England here? No, it's a great city. Any city whose two obsessions are football and the Beatles can't be a bad city, I reckon. So that was good fun. And if you'd asked me then, how was I? Was I healthy? I'd have said, yeah, I'm good. No problems. I just turned 60. I had been on what I thought was the right diet for all my life, low-fat diet. I exercised regularly. My blood sugar was fine. I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for asking. The reality was I probably wasn't quite as healthy as I thought I was. So for a start, I had a family history of type 2 diabetes. My father had developed diabetes at exactly the age I was then, 60. I was quite overweight, probably obese by definition. And like many middle-aged men, and I consider 60 middle-aged, I used to think it was old, but now I think it's middle-aged, I'd probably put on half a kilogram a year for 30 years. Slowly getting thicker around the waist. My kids are sort of starting to, poke me in the guts and say, come on, Dad. And I just shrug my shoulders and say, well, I'm on the right diet and, exercise. And it's not my fault. As well, I had some metabolic issues. I had a high triglyceride, I had high insulin, and I had a thing called a fatty liver for 10 years. Every time I had a blood test, it would come back saying, consistent with fatty liver. Well, I didn't really know what a fatty liver was. I'm a sports doctor, wasn't I? And I was on a low-fat diet. I thought, I'll be fine. So I ignored the fatty liver, like a typical doctor. And so, I was clearly, metabolically unwell, and in retrospect, clearly pre-diabetic, but I didn't realise that at the time. Anyway, around that time, I sort of heard a bit of a whisper that there were some people, and one person in particular, a colleague of mine called Tim Noakes in South Africa, who's an old friend of mine, super smart guy, and until I met Avi, he was the smartest person I'd ever met. But he came out and said, you know, he thought we had all this diet thing wrong. You know, that, you know, it wasn't fat that was a problem; it was carbohydrates, and that he'd reversed his own type 2 diabetes by changing his diet. And I thought, oh, come on, Jim, don't be ridiculous. You know, that couldn't possibly be right. You know, we couldn't. The whole Western society couldn't have had things wrong for the last, 50 years, and yet he's saying we did. Anyway, it prompted me to sort of start looking into it. So I read a book, which is unusual for a doctor, and it was a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by a guy called Gary Taubes, so some of you may have heard about. And this book just sort of blew me away completely. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. Because not only did it talk about the sort of the relative merits of fats and carbohydrates, but it talked about the history and the politics of how the low-fat movement had won out over the low-carb movement back in the 60s and 70s, which I always assumed was due to good science and evidence, and but in fact turned out to be, not surprisingly, due to money, power, and politics. I shouldn't have been surprised. So this book really, I found it really disturbing. I mean, I remember I had this lovely apartment in Liverpool, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed looking out over the Mersey River and feeling quite disturbed, thinking, no, this could not be right. I mean, this couldn't be that we all had this wrong for so long. Anyway, being a bit obsessive compulsive as I am, I dived into every article, book, video that I could find over the next few months, and the more I read, the more I thought, I think he's right. So I thought, well, I'm a scientist, supposedly, and I thought I need to do some research. I need to do an experiment. Now, I'm also, as a scientist, I know that research with an n equals 1 is a waste of time, except when the 1 is you. So I decided it was time for an n equal 1 experiment on myself. So I decided I'd go 3 months, hardcore low carb, okay? Day 1, weighed myself, got my bloods done, went hardcore low carb. So no sugar, obviously, but no starch, no potato, rice, pasta, bread, no soft drinks, nothing. And so instead I would eat the way my grandparents had probably eaten. Meat and fish and eggs, and all that cholesterol, oh my God, dairy, it's saturated fat, my God, you'll drop dead of a heart attack. Butter, cream, lots of stuff, non-starchy vegetables, and the only fruit I had was berries. So I embarked on that for 3 months. So what happened? Well, the first thing that happened was I stopped being hungry. So instead of having my cereal for breakfast and 8 o'clock or whatever, and then getting to about 10:30 thinking, oh God, is it lunchtime yet? I'd have bacon and eggs and avocado or something for breakfast, and I wouldn't eat again all day. So until the evening. So I went from eating sort of 3 meals and 3 snacks a day to eating 2 meals a day, which is what I eat today. And by the way, lovely meal, wherever you are, that was lovely. So that was the first thing. And then I started to lose weight, and then I started to feel better and more energetic, slept better, my exercise capacity increased, I improved. I remember one day getting on the treadmill thinking I could run forever, and I always found running difficult, and it was an amazing feeling. Anyway, at the end of that 3 months, I'd lost 13 kilograms in 13 weeks. Without ever being hungry, I'd eaten as much as I wanted to eat, but the more fat I ate, the more fat I lost. It was quite paradoxical. I just felt fantastic. So I got my bloods done, and my bloods all pretty much had gone back to normal. My fatty liver that I'd had for 10 years completely disappeared. So all the results were back to normal. And it just blew me away. I just had no idea that this could happen. There was one drawback. I needed a new wardrobe. So I went down 2 sizes, and but I figured that was a small price to pay. So when that happens, I guess you got 1 or 2 choices, haven't you? You can either say, well, I'm all right, mate, keep it to yourself, or you can start spreading the word. And I decided it was, I'd learned this. I wouldn't say I discovered it. Obviously, many other people had discovered it long before me, but I'd come across it, and I had a bit of a platform through my sporting involvement, and I thought, well, people keep telling me, people might listen to you because they know who you are. So I embarked on this journey. So that's that's been sort of my journey, and it really was an incredible eye opener, as I said. I mean, we've got massive health problems in our society at the moment. We have two huge epidemics, of obesity and diabetes, or diabesity as we call it. And yet nobody seems to be doing anything about it. Nobody seems to be worried about it. We shut down the whole of the country about a pandemic a few years ago, and it's probably not going to cause nearly as much damage as diabetes and obesity, and yet no one cares. We're not marching up to Parliament demanding action or campaigns on the front page of the paper. We just seem to accept it. We're one of the fattest nations in the world. I love the Olympics, and you love to sort of see, we want to be in the top 6 in the medal tally in the Olympics, don't we? Well, we're in the top 6 in the medal tally of obesity. It's a terrible indictment. I mean, look at Australia. How can we be a fat country? We've got a fantastic climate. We've got, we exercise. We're a wealthy country. We've got access to good food, and yet we're one of the fattest countries in the world. We can't quite compete with the Americans. Same with the Olympics, but we're not far behind. And kids, adults, 70% of Australian males are overweight, more than 50% of women, and more than a quarter of our children. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was at school, there were no fat kids around. We had one, kid who probably wouldn't even be considered fat now, but he was a bit overweight. We called him Fatty, as you did in those days, politically incorrect. But, it just wasn't a thing. Now, it's nearly a third of kids are overweight or obese. And you've only got to have a look in their lunch boxes and you'll soon know why. So obesity is a massive problem. And then there's diabetes, type 2 diabetes in particular. There's probably 1.5, nearly 2 million people in Australia with type 2 diabetes. That's an awful lot of adults. And it's not, not that diabetes is so much the problem. I think one of the reasons it's sort of underestimated is that people don't die of diabetes, they die of the complications of diabetes. So diabetes is the most common cause of blindness, most common cause of amputations, most common cause of kidney disease, chronic kidney disease, dialysis, transplants. It's the biggest single risk factor for cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, more than cholesterol, the biggest factor, but yet all we hear about is cholesterol. Maybe there's a drug for cholesterol. Anyway, we won't go to that. Cardiovascular disease, which is the biggest killer. There's now more and more evidence of its role in cancer, in mental health, and Alzheimer's. There's the scourge of all of us people who are getting older. They call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, such as the link with diabetes. So these are the things that kill us. They're the things that are caused by your diabetes. So diabetes is, I think, the single biggest health problem in our country. And what do you reckon the recommended diet for diabetes is?
Carbohydrates.
You guessed it.
Sorry, I'm angry because my husband's GP.
The recommended diet is a high carbohydrate diet for someone. So type 2 diabetes is basically a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. Your body no longer tolerates carbohydrate. You have sugars, your insulin spikes, you get a fatty liver, all these sort of things. And yet, the recommended diet is more carbohydrates. It's like saying to an alcoholic, oh, you've got to have alcohol. Or someone with celiac disease, oh, have lots of gluten. We encourage people with diabetes to have lots of carbohydrate, for which they are intolerant. It is just, doctors are supposed to be intelligent. And for some reason we have this blind spot, primarily created by the pharmaceutical industry, probably with their obsession about fat and cholesterol. We have this blind spot about diet. And we've been giving people the wrong diet for 50 years. And as a result, we've got fatter and sicker for 50 years. It's just scary. And yet, the solution is so simple and so obvious. We now know that if you embark on a low carbohydrate diet, or even a ketogenic diet, we probably should explain let's go back a step. What are carbohydrates? Because I think it's important to understand. So there are two types of carbohydrates, okay? Sugar and starches. We sort of know sugar, you know, sucrose, which is glucose, and fructose, and we all have, you know, way too much of it. There's a sugar-demic in this country, and sugar is everywhere. It's in all processed foods. The processed food industry is very clever. They just have us addicted to sweetness, and we expect everything to be sweet. So sugar is in everything. And you know, even the dietitians will say, oh, you shouldn't have too much sugar. You know, sugar's not great for you. But what they don't get is the other type of carbohydrate, which is the starches. So we're talking about, you know, potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, and so on. They're starches. And what starches are simply glucose molecules, sugar molecules, stuck together in a row. Simple as that. That's all they are. And when the body consumes a starch, your gastrointestinal system breaks down the starch, and what is absorbed into the bloodstream at the end of it all is glucose. The same glucose you get when you have a can of Coca-Cola. It just takes a little bit longer to get there. So that's what people, the dietitians and so on, don't understand. That it's not just sugar, it's starches that are the problem, and we're under the umbrella of carbohydrate. Now, how much carbohydrate should we be eating? Well, the average Australian is probably eating 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrate a day, which is quite a lot. When we talk about low carb, we're probably talking about under 130 grams, something like that. And then we talk about keto, we're talking 30 to 50, under 30 or 50 grams of carbohydrate. Now, when we talk about keto, it's important to understand what we're talking about. The body has two primary fuel systems. You know, we can get some fuel from protein, but it's pretty small. Glucose, or carbohydrate in the form of glucose, and fats in the form of ketone bodies, hence the term keto or ketogenic diet. If there's glucose around, the body will always preferentially use glucose. So if you're taking in carbohydrates, you know, your body will use that as its primary fuel. However, if you deprive the body of carbohydrate, the body will switch from petrol to diesel, from carbohydrate to fat in the form of ketone bodies. So that the body will use ketone bodies as its fuel. And the body does very well on ketone bodies. The brain does very well on ketone bodies. Even athletes do well on ketones. So where do we get those ketones from? Well, we can get them from diet, but we also get them from our own fat stores. We break down our fat. That's why the ketogenic diet is such an effective diet in weight loss, because we're actually burning our own body fat. And you feel pretty good when you're on a ketogenic diet. Initially, for a week or two, it might be tricky, but you do feel really good. So, should everyone be on a ketogenic diet? Some people say we should. Some people say we should be carnivore. Is that right? Which is obviously the ultimate, you know, sort of low carb diet, and that's, you know, many people do very well on that. But I don't believe in one specific diet for everyone. I think we're all different. That we all have the right amount of carbs for us, for each individual. So if you're, you know, morbidly obese, type 2 diabetic, chronic disease, you know, you need to be at the keto end of the spectrum, if you like. You know, 20, 30 grams of carbohydrates a day, at least until you get your metabolic health under control. On the other hand, if you're, you know, young and fit and skinny and insulin sensitive, you can have, you know, 100, 150 grams of carbs a day. Most of the rest of us are probably somewhere in the middle. I know in my experience, I went pretty hard for that first 3 months, got my metabolic health under control, backed off a little bit. I was probably 30 grams a day for 3 months. I don't count my carbs, I just go with gut feel, and now I'm guessing I'm sort of 70 or 80 grams of carbs a day, and that seems to be right for me. Doesn't mean it's right for anyone else, but you'll find out what's right. You know, what feels good, and B, what your weight does. Your weight's a pretty good indicator. If your weight starts creeping back up again, time to cut back and so on. So that's what we mean by low carb and ketogenic diet. So the issue is, does it work? Is there evidence that a low carb diet can help in the management of various conditions? Well, let's just go through some of the more common conditions, and I'm not going to go through everything, but obesity, there's been a lot of trials now comparing a low carb diet to the traditional low fat diet that we've all been told to eat for 50 years. And almost without exception, the low carb diets prove to be more effective in weight loss. Similarly with diabetes, there's good evidence now that a low carb diet can even put diabetes into remission. Now, when I was in medical school, we were told that diabetes was a chronic progressive disease. There was no cure, you'd be on medication for life, and you'll ultimately get the complications that I talked about before. Not so. There is another way. We can actually put diabetes into remission. We've just finished a study at La Trobe. It was actually published, part of it was published this week, looking at a group of people with type 2 diabetes who went onto our Defeat Diabetes app and our program, and nearly all of them improved their diabetes control, and more than half of them are now under the threshold for diabetes. So they don't, by definition, no longer have diabetes. Now, that's not supposed to be able to happen. According to most doctors, that can't happen. You need drugs. Sadly, the medical profession, and I don't like to criticise my own profession, but the medical profession has been bought. It's been bought by the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry is so clever that medicine doesn't even realise it's been bought. Doctors get all their education from pharmaceutical companies. All research is funded by pharmaceutical companies. That's how they operate. They're very clever. They spend a hell of a lot of money convincing GPs to prescribe drugs. That's because they make a hell of a lot of money out of drugs. So, and the medical profession doesn't realise that they've been bought. I didn't realise for 40 years, and Amy didn't realise for a while. No, we'd all, Sam the same, we all just go along with things, we're very compliant as doctors, we do what we're told, we spout what we taught in medical school. And it's only the very enlightened people who can lead you into the new world, if you like. So, a low carb diet is a very effective treatment for type 2 diabetes. As I said, we developed a program called Defeat Diabetes, which is just a whole lot of videos and articles and recipes and meal plans and so on. And as I said, more than 50% of people are no longer, strictly speaking, got diabetes. So if they go back to poor eating, it's a bit like alcoholism. You're never completely cured of it, but you're not considered as having diabetes at the time.